All right. Thank you, Tracy. So this is what I call Beyond Sleep Hygiene, where I talk about the best sleep practices. And it helps to have some of the science underlying it. So I'll talk about first what normal sleep looks like, the cycles of that move throughout the night, REM and non-REM, what they do, and then talk about these two major factors that influence our ability to be asleep or awake at any given time. And then there's this third modulating factor, this wild card we have to deal with as well. Why are these important? How do they interact? And what is the most important one? Well, I'll give you a little hint, a little spoiler. They are all important. What is sleep hygiene? You've heard this a million different ways online, but that's really only like the foundation, the beginning of what we need to do to sleep well. And so we'll talk about which features are most important there, and then we'll graduate. This is the graduate course, right? We'll go to the best sleep practices and show how they really are different from just sleep hygiene. And then I'll cover the functions of sleep. Impossible to do in one talk. Okay. So normal sleep structure. So here on the left would be state of consciousness. Here would be wake. Here is REM sleep in this kind of maroonish color. And then non-REM, non-dream sleep has different stages, different levels. So there's 1, 2, and 3 now, where they combine 3 and 4. And along the x-axis is time. So this would be time of night. So here, this idealized person is going to sleep at 11 o'clock and allowing till 7 in the morning to sleep. And so what happens, a couple things to notice. One is there are cycles of sleep that occur throughout the night. They're approximately 90 minutes long on average. And then they're comprised of the different stages. And so typically the first couple cycles, we drift right into light sleep, non-REM stage 1 and 2, and then head directly to stage 3, which is really the deepest level of sleep as far as our brains go. Most of our brains are offline. If you awaken during this stage, you're pretty well out to lunch wondering who you are, where you are. But then you'll quickly come out of that after, say, 40, 50, 60 minutes or so, and then sort of pass through the same lighter sleep and maybe go into your first REM sleep period, first dream sleep period, which is fairly brief. So the first couple of dream sleep periods are fairly brief, and the deep sleep periods are pretty long in the early part of the night. But then as we cycle through the night, in each cycle, we find that two things are happening in opposite directions. One, REM sleep is becoming longer. The periods are longer as the night progresses. And non-REM, that deep sleep, that refreshing, really delicious sleep, lessens as the night moves on. And this is important for a couple of reasons, which we'll address later, both in, when something goes wrong with sleep, if it's happening in the early part of the night, it's going to tell us something different than what's happening in the latter part of the night. But there's another really important reason, and that is because of the functions of these different types of sleep. So REM sleep or dream sleep is crucially important in memory and learning. Okay, it really helps us lay down the information of the day that's really important, clear out the junk that we don't need to remember, all that trivia stuff, everything we picked up on Facebook, we can eliminate and just keep the nuggets. And what's really important about early awakenings is because REM occurs much more in the latter part of the night, early awakenings will cut off our dream sleep selectively. And that's really an issue if we're trying to focus on keeping our memory. In recovery sleep, so if we spend the whole night awake, if we pulled an all-nighter, probably none of us do that anymore, but we've done that in college and back in the day, then your sleep would look like rebound. It would have a rebound. So the early part of the night, you would jump into longer periods of REM, trying to make up for it, telling us how important it is. And finally, the more stressed we are, the more we need our REM sleep. REM sleep is really important for emotional processing. And so that's what stress is all about, right? Trying to hold all the stuff we need to hold from the day, particularly in this crazy world we're living in today. So if anything, we need our REM sleep even more today. But now this deep sleep is also important. It kind of does a lot of the physiologic repair work. So growth hormone, which is primarily released during sleep, is mostly released during this deep sleep. And so in the beginning of the night, we get a lot of growth hormone release, a lot of muscle repair, a lot of body repair. It also will rebound markedly if we've pulled an all-nighter. So if we pull an all-nighter, the first thing that happens is we just skip that light sleep. We don't even bother with it. We just dive right into really deep sleep, long period of deep sleep, and then we'll dive right into a long period of dream sleep. And they alternate for a while till we've made up some of that lost sleep. But we can't really go too many nights and make up sleep. Some of that sleep is lost forever. And finally, it restores the physical and physiologic functions of bodies, our sleep, our muscles, our hormones. All that replacement is done during this part of the sleep period. But they're both important. And in fact, some of the studies that look at learning and memory and look at insight, for optimal insight, we need both stages. So there's no way to weigh them both. Okay, it's not an either or. We need them both, and we need our full nights. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. Now, unfortunately, for all of us, the best deep sleep that we will ever get is when we were young. And that time has long passed. So even as young adults, so that graphic I showed you looks a lot more like this, where they have nice even periods. They have a good amount of deep sleep and a good amount of REM sleep. And then as we get older, though, a couple of things change. One is these really big, deep waves, we call them slow waves, that occur in this deep sleep non-REM period. They're these huge waves which indicates tons and tons of neurons that are firing in synchrony. So they're all turning on together, turning off together, turning on together, turning off together. And then we have less of the turning on and turning off and turning on and turning off. They're just less, we think less neurons overall. But as a child, everything comes in and the neurons just keep growing. And somewhere around adolescence, that stops. And then finally, as we get older, we have much less of that really deep sleep. And you can see here, there are lots of returns to wakefulness during this 75-year-old's sleep. And there's much less, there's no the really deep sleep, but there's still some. Okay, so sleep gets more fragmented as we get older. And there are a lot of reasons for that, not just physiologically and the change that occurs in our brains, but also what's going on in our lives. We have more aches and pains, more medicines, more, since we don't have as deep a sleep, more disturbances, things that didn't used to bother us, light and such, can now wake us up. Okay, I'm going to get now to these major factors that really affect our ability to sleep at any given time, at any age, pretty much. So I'm going to talk about sleep pressure, which is the longer we're awake, the more likely we're going to fall asleep. Okay, so right now, if we pull an all-nighter, we're going to be really sleepy by the time sleep time comes around tomorrow night. And one of the reasons is there's this buildup of adenosine. And adenosine is one of the waste products of cognitive function, our brains being on, doing our thinking, planning, all of the stuff brains do. One of the byproducts is adenosine. And you may not know adenosine, but you know what its antagonist is, and that's caffeine, right? So caffeine displaces adenosine, and that's how it keeps us alert. But at some point, even the caffeine doesn't work, and the adenosine finally wins, and we have to get some sleep. Of note, there are other waste products of neuronal metabolism, and these two are the scary ones. So tau and beta amyloid proteins are what are found in Alzheimer's disease, what we think are killing off those cells. And these need to be cleared every night, and they're only cleared by the physiologic state of sleep. So when we're not getting enough sleep, we may be allowing these to build up. Now, it's not just a night or two. This is chronic. So it's over time. If we continually truncate our sleep, then these proteins can build up and can increase our risk for dementia later on. Now, I group these two together, the circadian drive. You've heard a lot about circadian rhythms. This is what keeps us alert during the day. Excuse me. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how that works. Light actually turns off melatonin. So in the morning, that's how we know it's morning. And that's how we know to turn off melatonin. It also lets us know that it's daytime and begins signaling the reticular activating system, which sounds like what it does. It activates the brain, okay? It sends signals up from the brainstem that turn on the brain. I have a slide or so I might show you about that. But essentially, this turns on the brain, and our wake propensity, the ability for us to feel wakeful and alert throughout the day, continues because this process continues, and we continually have activation during the day. There's a little dip we'll talk about. But this is mainly related to cortisol, as well as some of the stress hormones, which can keep us awake. And that is the wild card we're going to talk about finally. The last piece is this emotional arousal, the stuff that stress does to our brains, okay? And these things build up during the day, and they can keep us awake. Cognitive inputs can and do exacerbate this stress. So, when we're not sleeping, for instance, and we're trying to sleep, and we must because we have a major project to do the next day, and we're saying, why can't I sleep? I need to get to sleep. That's the cognitive throughput. Or you start saying, I'm never going to sleep again. My sleep is broken. I'm going to need help. Whatever that is can make all of this process worse and keep us awake. So let's see how that works. So I'm going to show you this graphic a couple of times. So let me orient you a little bit. Along the x-axis down here is time. And again, this is like time of night, morning, afternoon, evening, and night. And then another morning, afternoon, evening, night. So these are rhythms that run through our days. Okay, these are basic physiologic rhythms. Now, they interact together, and we're going to talk first about the sleep pressure, which I just mentioned, right? The longer we're awake, there's a greater pressure to fall asleep. And then finally, hopefully, we go to sleep at some time, and then those products that are built up, the adenosine and the other products, are metabolized away, they're washed away, lymphatic system in the brain opens up and clears out the junk. And then we get up the next day and we start the process over again. But of course, we don't feel this incremental sleepiness during the day. We may find ourselves sleepy at different times during the day. And in fact, our wake propensity here is such that we have a drive to wakefulness, we have a dip in the afternoon, and then we may be even more alert in the evening. And how can this be if this was the only major factor? We should be sleepier here. But that calls into play both the wake propensity and the alertness drive, or our circadian rhythm. So it turns on, again, mentioning light, and I'm going to get more into that in some detail, but light turns on this rhythm, and it tells the brain to turn off melatonin and to start shooting out cortisol and other activating hormones and neurotransmitters to awaken our brain, to keep it active. It actually backs off mid-afternoon, okay? And precisely about 8 hours after arising, there's that dip in energy we all probably feel or have felt at some time. And then if we're really sleepy and we haven't been meeting our sleep need on a regular basis, we're probably able to even fall asleep during this time. But if we just feel a dip in energy, that's telling us we have a reasonable amount of sleep on board. And so we'll just find this dip, something that, we might have our cup of tea or find a way to get through this, and then we can become more alert in the evening because this now kicks into overdrive and offsets the sleepiness that's building up. And then it needs to turn off at the same time, hopefully, that we've built up enough sleepiness so sleep can occur and we can go through this day in and day out. Now, when we don't get enough sleep, okay, particularly when it's chronic. And so this is sort of a little bit of an exaggeration, but let's assume we're only getting 5 hours a night and we need 8, okay? So what happens is, one, we stay up later than our typical time. And so even though our circadian drive, our clock, internal clock turns off and allows us to fall asleep, we decide to stay up later because we have extra work or we want to see that fourth or fifth binged episode of Netflix and just can't quite turn it off, right? So we stay up later, and so we get sleepier, but we're doing things to keep ourselves going, and then finally we get to sleep. But now we don't clear out all the stuff that's built up, and the next day, instead of it starting fresh, we're carrying over some of these toxins, we're carrying over some of this sleepiness. And this sleepiness can be so powerful that we can fall asleep anywhere at any time, as evidenced by these forest firefighters who they're going 24/7, right? They don't have a chance to take a break, and they're going to catch some sleep whenever they can, wherever they can. This guy's sleeping. He's got a little fire going here about an hour from his, a foot from his hair, from his head, and he most likely won't wake up until his hair's on fire. Okay, and I don't say this lightly. These are my scary slides. There's only one more, and that's this one, because not only, I mean, it's probably our strongest drive to sleep, because our survival, our very survival, knowing that if we fall asleep driving at 40 or 50 or 60 miles an hour, we're going to die, we still fall asleep. This was a Metro North on the East Coast, right along the Hudson River. A engineer took a 30-mile-an-hour curve at 80 miles an hour. He was discovered to have sleep apnea and was on the night shift. Chernobyl, before Fukushima, Chernobyl was the worst nuclear accident the world has ever seen. A human error, middle of the night, making mistakes because they were sleep deprived. Challenger explosion, decisions made middle of the night, sleep deprived engineers, and the Exxon Valdez oil spill, at the time one of the worst ever. Again, first mate was on his second shift because the captain had tied one on and wasn't available, and he ran aground. So this is serious, and it's a strong, powerful drive. And so I just really like to emphasize that for most people. All right. So that's the sleep drive. Right now, let's just say we're hopefully sleeping reasonably well, getting our sleep at night. Let's talk about how this alertness drive can interact. Now, I mentioned that it actually is controlled by light or regulated by light, okay? And here's the way that works. Now, in the retina, which is the business part of the eye, all that information comes into the retina. I always get a little funny talking about the retina because Mary did some serious research on the retina in graduate school, but I'll do my best. They've now discovered that there's a subset of cells that, beyond the ones that give us vision, color, light, shape, and all that, there are cells that only code for the presence or absence of light. And they carry that information back to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. That's the SCN mentioned earlier, okay? That signals the rest of the brain to turn on. It also signals the pineal gland, which is deeper in the brain, and the pineal gland is the home of melatonin production. So in the presence of light, melatonin production is shut down, and that's how we know it's morning. Now, at night, melatonin will come back on in the absence of light and hopefully in where there's darkness. But there's a second feature of this system, and that is there's an endogenous or an internal rhythm that will turn on melatonin approximately 16 hours later in an 8-hour-a-night sleeper. All right, 8 and 16, 24. That's our circadian or near a day rhythm. Okay, that's what keeps us in tune with the light of the sun, the seasons, okay, the seasonal changes, the morning and night. That's how we are regulated by the natural world And that's how it regulates our internal system. But the system is built in too, that'll turn on. And early studies were done in caves, which pulled out all of the signals of day and night. And there was still this circadian rhythm, this rhythm of melatonin, which would come on again about 16 hours later in the absence of light because it was all dark. And what happens is it begins to run a little bit later each day. So if you're in the absence of light, you can go for weeks and your rhythm will eventually shift around if you never have the sun to help regulate it. So that's important to know because light actually does regulate it, and it goes in one direction. It's unidirectional. So we have a saying that west is best because when you fly time zones, you're now messing with your internal clock, right? Your internal clock turns on in the morning here, but let's say if you fly to the West Coast, now your clock wants to turn off, okay, at your New York time, your East Coast time, and wants you to go to sleep at your East Coast time, but you're on the West Coast and you're hanging out with friends or colleagues and you're up later. So now you're pushing that sleep pressure off. You're allowing it to grow. We know we can do that. You can stay up later. Your circadian clock wants you to go to sleep, but you're pushing through it and you can stay up later. Now and we have lots of signals that help us stay later. We know that clock, that internal rhythm is allowed to move later. We can push off our bedtime. But when we fly back east is when we have an issue. And that's only 3 time zones from California. But if we fly from East Coast, for instance, to Europe, that's 6 time zones. And this really gets out of whack. So now we've been in California long enough for our clocks to get that light of California and tell our brains morning is 9 o'clock in California. We fly back to East Coast and now we're 3 hours different. And so when we try to go to sleep, our circadian rhythm is now not going to allow us to go to sleep until it's California time to go to bed, which can be really late on our time. So that's how light regulates our rhythms, and that's the experience of the real world. We've all had this. And this is why, again, when we get to some of the sleep hygiene recommendations and best sleep practices, regulating light exposure is going to be really important. And now for the wild card, okay? It is the third factor, but this wild card, this overwhelm of our days, finding ways to deal with stress is going to be really important because even if we've been up to our regular time, we have enough sleep on board to make us sleepy to fall asleep, we've gotten up at the right time, so our clock's ready to turn off and allow us to fall asleep. If we don't deal with the stressors of our day and carry them to bed with us, then our arousal may be too high to allow us to fall asleep. Or if you have remember, this is an interaction between all of these factors, right? Some people have a stronger sleep system and can maybe override the stress and fall asleep just fine at their regular time. But then they wake up after a couple of cycles of sleep, and now they're awake and all the troubles of the day come through. Now that they've had a little bit of sleep, now the brain can go or the mind can go, hey, how about this? How about that? Why didn't we deal with this? Why don't we? And then they may not be able to return to sleep or could be up during the middle of the night for a couple of hours. So we want to find ways to deal with our stress and arousal, as well as regulate our regular sleep and our regular rhythms. So I like to then put these all together and call these the pressures that can influence our sleep and wake propensity. There's a sleep pressure, there's a wake pressure, and then there's a stress pressure. So we want to make sure all 3 are in place to allow us to get really healthy, regular sleep. Okay. So that's some of the science that underlies our ability to sleep at any given time. And this is why some of these sleep hygiene recommendations are made. These are regular practices we do. They're not even practices, really. These are the actions we do to facilitate sleep, right? So recommendations are keep a regular bed and wake times. And now we know wake time is really important, right? We want to get that light exposure so our brain knows when to turn off later tonight. All of us on this call right now already have our bedtimes encoded in our brains by when we arose this morning. And by arising in the morning, I mean exposure to light. We all want our bedrooms comfortable, temperature-wise. When we talk about menopause, that's going to be really critical. But in general, we want it to be comfortable, free of noise, and especially free of light. And that means all of our devices, everything we're looking at right now. I had to pull out my program, which takes the blues out. All of our laptops and tablets and phones have these features now. So it pulls the blue light out after sunset, and as the sun is setting now, I had to turn it off so I could still see my screen. We want to cut down on caffeine and tobacco. That makes a lot of sense. They're stimulants, and we don't want stimulants too close to bedtime. And as we age, that caffeine that we had maybe to get through that afternoon dip time, siesta time, the caffeine we have at that time may begin lasting later and later into the evening. And so as we think we're going to sleep, we may still have caffeine on board, keeping us awake. Alcohol, you've probably all heard this already, but alcohol, it's a great relaxant and it may help us fall asleep. But if we have that nightcap, not good, because if we go to sleep with alcohol on board, it will eventually disturb our sleep and keep us disturbed for the rest of the night. You don't want to go to bed hungry. And I know you've been talking a lot about schedules and intermittent fasting and what to eat and when to eat. If you're intermittent fasting, I'm usually recommending that you make sure that last meal has good protein and good fats. I don't think Tracy will argue with me there. But you want to make sure it's going to last you through the night, so your blood glucose doesn't drop too low and wake you up to get some food. Exercising regularly, but not too late in the evening. Some of the later studies suggest that people can exercise regularly, even in the evening, and be able to go to sleep. But for the most part, you need to know what works for you. And so try it out. See if you work out late, do you have trouble falling asleep? If that's the case, then you're one of those who can't exercise too late in the evening. And of course, using the bed only for sleep and relaxing activities. We don't want to bring our work into the bedroom. And I love, I could have updated this. Yeah, I'm just too lazy to, but no, I really like going back. This is a New Yorker cartoon from way back when, we had our first wireless phones, but this is not a cell phone, but we were still doing the same things. You can see, his wife's light is off, his is on, he's got work papers around, he's got the laptop too close. That blue light is probably still not even keeping him awake because he's drifting off. And she's saying, you're sleepwalking again, dear, which is not something we want to do. So that's sleep hygiene, right? Keeping our sleep process clean. But we're going to go beyond that now, and we're going to create some sleep supportive behaviors that we build into our lives to prioritize sleep. So we want to be active about this. We want to do things that are going to actually improve our sleep, not just get what we can possibly squeeze out of our day. So there are several, and these are all related, and I'll get into them in detail, but setting a schedule in a way that optimizes sleep, we're going to talk about that. Taking time to relax, any practice that elicits the relaxation response. This is a way we deal with that, the stress or arousal of the day. We want to allow for ample wind down time before bed. We need some time for the mind to unload. We want to get those appropriate time cues. When do we get exposed to light? We want to really support those. And, unfortunately, that sleeping in on Saturday morning or Sunday morning, hopefully that's going to be a thing of the past. I'm going to have to show you how to do that, but we're going to have to get there. So let's talk about first this setting the schedule in real life. What do? Well, we know that all of our phones now have a bedtime alarm feature. And, my clients are saying to me, why in the hell would I want an alarm at night? I already have one I hate in the morning. And I say that's because you need to get a little cue. Now, it's not really an alarm. It's just a little ditty that goes off. It's a little cue to remind you to begin your bedtime routine. That is to reduce your activity levels, your light exposure. You may need to consider blue blocker glasses after a certain hour. I keep my prop handy. I should probably be doing this presentation with them on, but you might not be able to stop laughing long enough for me to do it. But these are the ones, and I'll mention again, these are orangey. You see the tint to them? They have an orange tint. They have little side panels, and they make them so they fit over your glasses if you wear glasses, and normal sized if you don't. And there's a reason why they're tinted. I'll come back to that. But even if you have to work late, a bedtime routine is absolutely critical for the body to learn to wind down. You need to get out of the way so sleep can emerge. We know the sleepiness is there. We want to get out of our way. And even if it's been a good thing, you've been out to dinner and a movie on the weekend, you know, we're able to, even with the pandemic, step out a little bit more. We need time to allow our mind to unload. Maybe there was some good conversation we had with dinner. We saw the latest Marvel blockbuster movie, and you know, we're excited about this or that. And so there's time for that to unload. If we just jump right into bed because, you know, the clock says it's that time, we should be, it's better to stay up a little bit later, allow it to unwind so you're not fighting it on, being at odds with your ability to sleep. Okay, taking time to relax. This is really important, and relax is a little more than just relaxing. We want to talk about the relaxation response. Now, this is a particular physiologic change. It's really the opposite to the fight or flight response. So the fight or flight response is our sympathetic, or you know, our autonomic nervous system. We have these two parts. Sympathetic is fight or flight. That's what we want when the saber-toothed tiger was chasing us, or maybe our boss is chasing us down the hall. But today we don't need that on 24/7, and we haven't found ways to turn it off, particularly if we're in overwhelm. And the way we turn it off is by moving into the relaxation response. So there's lots of different ways to do it. Herb Benson was a Harvard researcher who did this initial research. He coined the term, and he actually wrote a couple of books about the relaxation response. And he came up with a very simple practice. But anything that elicits it, progressive muscle relaxation, you know, where you tense each muscle group and then relax it, you tense and relax, kind of allows you to know where your attention is and helps you offload the tension. Any meditative practice. But if you're not the type that can sit and do the meditation, maybe you need to move. Okay, there are people who just can't sit. They need to keep the body moving so they can do meditative motion, light yoga, qigong, tai chi. These are movements that allow you to focus and give your mind something to do, but also to drop a couple of notches of arousal. A meditative walk outside, nature is like, you know, it's our real stress reducing medicine for us. Just walking in nature, not pounding the pavement or pounding the trail to get from here to there, but to really take that slow meditative walk, you know, like Thich Nhat Hanh likes to say, or used to say, each step you're kissing the earth. Okay, have that in mind as you're taking your walk. And that again will help you unload any kind of mindfulness practice. And maybe for you, just listening to enjoyable music is enough to get your head out of the work and into more relaxation. And finally, there are myriad apps on our phones, our tablets. If you're the type that likes guided meditations, you know, someone speaking to you and helping you guide yourself into a quieter state. Oh, sorry, that was a duplicate. So the relaxation response is the counterbalancing mechanism to the stress or fight or flight response. It changes our physiology. Okay, so our metabolism decreases, heart rate slows, muscles relax, our breathing becomes slower, our blood pressure drops, nitrous oxide is the relaxation gas neurotransmitter that's released. All of these things help our bodies quiet itself. And Benson came up with this simple practice. It's one you can take home. If you haven't done this before, find yourself 5 minutes, find a quiet place where you either close your eyes or just gaze lightly. You want to soften your gaze. We're staring at screens all day. We're looking at reports. We're reading. So we like to relax our eye muscles as well. I like to take a deep breath or two when I start this because it kind of signals to my body I'm moving into a different state. I'm stopping what I was doing and I'm doing something different. And then notice you're breathing easily and normally, allow it to slow down a little bit. And then once you do that, your mind is going to go, okay, we got this. Now, where was I? Okay, so am I going to get that project done? Who's picking up the kids? Who's buying the milk? And so we got to give this thing something to do, which a word or a phrase, we just choose something that we say to ourselves on the in-breath and the out-breath, and it helps give that something to do while we're calming down. And then, if you've never done it before, 5 minutes a day is we could find 5 minutes. We could always squeeze out 5 minutes and you'll be glad you did. Start with 5 minutes a day, okay? Do the practice 5 minutes a day, every day. Then once you're doing it for 5 minutes a day, every day, see if you can extend it to 10. That first 5 minutes, you're really only getting a couple of minutes of being in the state, right? You're working on getting there, now you're there, and then you got to get up. So by the time you're doing it for 10 minutes, you're getting a good 5 minutes of being in that state. And if you can get up to 15, great. Or add a second one during the day, because if you add a second one, now we're going to take that arousal and stress that's been building up all day. And one time, and these are arbitrary times, doing it the first time, you're going to drop that absolute level of stress that you've built up to that point. Now, you're going to go back into that same crazy world, but you're going to be at a lower absolute level than if you hadn't done anything at all. And now if you do it a second time, you're going to be even lower, so that come bedtime, you're going to be at a much more manageable level and your sleep arousal won't be anything to be concerned about, and it's out of your system. And if you're the type that nothing seems to work, the guided meditations, the yoga, the qigong, the whatever you've tried hasn't worked, well, we have technology for you. Technology does have a positive side, okay? Besides Facebook, there are good things we can find. And so there are biofeedback devices that help you become aware of how aroused your body is and helps you quiet the body without you trying to actually do that. You're just responding to some other signal in the environment, but that signal relates back to you how much tension or stress you have. Heart rate variability devices, these things are great because heart rate variability, without going into details, is a direct measure of whether you're in the parasympathetic, deep relaxation state, or the sympathetic, highly activation. And it can give you a signal as you're moving from one to the other, so you know how to do that. HeartMath is one I use. And the devices are small, they clip to your ear, and all they're doing is measuring your pulse, but then they calculate the heart rate variability. And so it's something you can carry with you. And finally, neurofeedback for the real hardcore. If nothing is working, we have some tools that you don't have to do anything. You can just sit in the chair. We monitor the brain activity and feedback information, so your brain gets it without you even lifting a finger, and your brain will help find a way to relax. And then that kind of deep relaxation can help drop our reactivity to this crazy Western world we're all living in, so that after time, we become less reactive and more responsive to the world. And combining that with our relaxation response practices during the day, now we can go to bed and, like the Zen masters, we're all hopefully getting to be. Okay. So we're about halfway in, maybe a little bit further than that. Shall I continue?
So that took 40 minutes, right, to get there.
Yeah, let me just see something here. So I'm on, well, I'm on 32. What do I have left? I only have about another 10 slides.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, let's go for it. All right. So allowing ample wind down time before bed. Quiet time. We want a bedtime routine. We want some quiet time. I like to recommend that after dinner, after the day is done, we want to bookend the day is finished, the kids are in bed or the dishes are done, dishwasher's loaded. It's a good time to get out a pen and paper or your electronic device and put down right then and there anything that's in your mind, certainly your to-do list for the next day or two, because these are the things that are going to come back when we're trying to sleep, if we aren't sleepy enough. So get everything out of your head, have it down on paper, and know that if it comes back later, it's already written down. You'll deal with it tomorrow. And then you want to go into watching your TV, reading, light conversation, light stretching, whatever you do to relax. Okay, so binge a couple of episodes of on Netflix, but have your bedtime alarm feature set so it's reminding you that when it goes off, this is the last episode. No matter what, I'm going to shut off the TV and I'm going to go to bed, or I'm going to shut off my laptop and then go to bed. But for all of us, we are unique. Find out what works for you. All of these recommendations, okay, may work for some and may work for you at certain times. So have a couple that work for you, figure out what helps you relax most and what helps you relax when you're maybe more stressed than at other times, and maybe what works when you're not as stressed. And then when you're sufficiently wound down, you prepare for sleep. Strengthen the appropriate time cues, okay? So this is really all about light. So in the morning, outdoor light exposure first thing is the best, because the light we get outdoors, even for 5 minutes, is enough to send a strong signal into the brain to tell us it's morning. If we get up, we hit the alarm, we lollygag in bed for a little bit, hit the snooze a couple times, we get up, we turn on that low light because we can't stand the bright light just yet. Our brain is getting mixed signals as to when morning actually is. And so when does it actually turn off melatonin and reset the clock for the next night? It's harder for it to know. So we want that strong light exposure in the morning. And then any outdoor activity we can do during the day. Just in the Northeast, we love our vitamin D. We need vitamin D. So anything you can do, the old 2 birds with 1 stone. Do your relaxation response exercise outside in daylight, and then outdoor light exposure lasting in the evening. Some of the most recent research suggests that orangey light exposure at sunset actually seems to protect the brain, the visual system, from later blue light exposure. So I'm not advocating later blue light exposure, but maybe you can sort of strengthen your system by having it exposed to the orange light of sunset. We're natural beings. Getting that light in the morning and at night can be really helpful. And again, after sunset, using blue blocker glasses, like I showed you before, the clear ones, they're tinted. They're the ones that may help reduce strain during the day when we're looking at our devices all day, but they will not help if they're not tinted for blocking blue light after sunset. Okay, guaranteed. Lots of research behind that. And finally, we want to reduce our weekend lag. We want to get up close to our regular time on the weekend, okay? See how smiling and happy she is to get up at 7 o'clock on Saturday morning. You're not going to be smiling like that, but you will be once you start getting all that extra sleep. What you want to be able to do is take that time. Let's say you haven't been meeting your sleep need during the week. You need 8 hours a night. And again, that's an average. Okay, it's an average. Some people need 7, some need 7.5 every night, some need 8.5. Okay, so 8 is about the average, 7 to 9 is the range. But let's say you need 8 hours a night and you're really only managing 7.5. By the time the weekend rolls around, you owe the bank, and there is a sleep bank, 2.5 hours of sleep. So that's why we sleep in Saturday morning and Sunday morning if we can. Well, that extra sleep then begins to shift your clock if you get up later, right? Now we all know about our circadian rhythms. We get exposed to light an hour, hour and a half later on Saturday. That means Saturday night, our brains aren't going to be ready to go to sleep at our regular time. And right, we don't care. We want to go out Saturday night. We want to stay out and party. It's the weekend. But then comes Sunday night. And it's so regular in Western society, sleep docs have a name for it, and it's called Sunday night insomnia. Because now you've slept in a couple of days, you've stayed up later, and you want to go to bed earlier at your regular time for getting up for work Monday morning, but it's not happening. You're lying in there awake, and that's because you've shifted your clock later. So if you want to make up for lost sleep during the week, rather than sleep in, get up close to your regular weekday time, and then build that time. Look, you were going to sleep in anyway. Take that time and build in an afternoon nap. Reward yourself for not sleeping in. And you have to go in the bedroom, lock the door, put in earplugs, pull the shades, put on the eye shades, and really get that hour, hour and a half in the afternoon. And do that on Saturday or Sunday, and you'll be happy you did. At other times, napping, as long as you're keeping it under 20 minutes, remember the sleep cycles. So it takes a little bit of time before we get into that really deep sleep. And so if we only have a nap to about here, we're going to be able to wake up and come out of that pretty refreshed. If we allow the sleep to drop into deeper sleep, we start pushing 30 minutes for a nap at other times, and we're not making up for lost sleep, we're going to be dipping into that really deep sleep and turn our brains off and make it difficult to get back to work or whatever else we were doing. And finally, certainly a 10-minute, during that circadian dip time is a great refresher. I even say to people, if you're going to need the coffee, have some of the coffee, take your 10-minute nap, and by the time the caffeine actually kicks in, it takes a good 20, 30 minutes to kick in, you'll be up and at 'em and ready to tackle the afternoon. All right. What are the functions of sleep? Okay, let's see. All of them. There is nothing sleep does not repair. If you really think about it, sleep is the only time we get to do all of the repair work, whether it's learning and memory, laying down new memories, whether it's learning how to act during the day, how to regulate our emotions, whether we want to have improved creativity and insight. All of these things are important, and there are numerous studies showing the lack of sleep negatively impacts all of these domains. In addition, it impacts negatively all of these domains, all of our physical domains, okay? So all of our physiologic functions. We work out during the day to get those muscles repaired, so we're ready to build muscle for the next day. That happens at night. Metabolic function. Okay, all of our metabolism. Remember, we have to clear the stuff out that we've built up during the day, or the rest of our physiology has to clear out the old broken down hormones we've used and build new ones. Plus our cardiovascular system, for instance, right? Our hearts are slowing down during sleep. They get a chance to sort of go offline a little bit. We don't want them to stop. We don't want that heart to stop beating, but we do want it to quiet down so we can do some of its repair work, which happens during sleep. If we're cutting down on our sleep, that's less time for the heart to recover. Our appearance, we've seen the bags under the eyes. We know what we look like when we're not getting enough sleep, but we may not know that you can be eating really well, you can be exercising really well, but if you're not sleeping and meeting your sleep need, you can still put on weight because your ability to regulate your appetite, your satiety, those hormones are destroyed by chronic sleep deprivation. Okay, so you don't know when you're full, you don't know when you're hungry, when you need to be eating. And anyone who's pulled all-nighters kind of knows this. We have, unfortunately, in the sleep labs, we would have our night techs, and they would have a hard time. They would bring in a bunch of food because they really weren't sure when they were hungry during the night. And so they would eat almost continuously during the night because they were never told by their hormones when they were full. They were never told when they were hungry. So, it's kind of like defensive eating. Well, I'm going to probably be hungry. Yeah, it's close to that mealtime. I think I'll have some more. And of course, you're eating fatty and salty and snacky kinds of things. So not good for your weight. And ultimately, increasing weight and disrupting glucose metabolism can lead to diabetes and so on. But right now, I'm just going to show you a little bit of data on immune function. This study was done with the flu vaccine well before COVID was even on the map. It's been validated in with other viruses, other vaccines, like for the hepatitis vaccines and so on. But essentially, they looked at people who had poor sleep and people who are sleeping well, and they gave them the flu vaccine, and they looked at their antibody response. And what they found was there was more than twice the antibody response in normal sleeping people compared to those who were sleep deprived. And not only was it out at 10 days, but out 3 weeks to a month, there was still a measurable difference between those who were sleeping well and how much antibody they still had on board.